All right, and welcome to this is Survey of Economics. Will this be day 3? So week 2, day 1. Awesome. So picking up, let's see, can we get this guy focused maybe? There we go. A little bit zoomed in. Oh, I gotta actually share it with you guys. It's recording, but you can't see it. People on the internet don't know that. All right, cool. Week 2, day 1. So picking up from where we left off last Thursday, right? So we had these 4 fundamental questions, right? We asked about what goods and services will be produced, how will those goods and services be produced, who will get the goods and services, and then how will that system promote progress, right? So let's talk about some of this stuff now that we've kind of done the readings, right? We had to learn smarts. So how does the market system dictate the goods and services that are being produced? By what mechanism? Or what principle, rather? So let's say you had a little shop in downtown, right? How would you decide what goods and services to sell? What would be the deciding factor?
Based on like how popular they are and like competition
Right.
and like
yeah, pricing,
profit.
exactly, your profit, yes, your expected profit of it, right? So the price is the thing that answers what goods and services will be produced, right? Specifically, the expected profit of that particular good, right? And then how will that good and service be produced? So it's going to be produced independently of some central authority, right? With various means, and remember, we're in a mixed economy, right? So it's not centrally planned, but it's not completely independent, right? And so there are some regulations that we have in place, right? So maybe some of you have encountered these regulations when you were working in high school, right? Child labor laws about how much you can work each day, how much you can work each week, right? If you work for the college, there's certain regulations about how much they can work you as a student, right? I think it's up to 30 hours, you can be a part-time, something like that. So for specific jobs, obviously, right? You can get a full-time job here and then also go to school here. But so we live within this system, these institutions, but the goods and services are produced through the marketplace, right? And through independent action by sellers who will get the goods and services. So how is this figured out? Is it that we all are we stand in a bread line and we all get the same amount of goods every month, or just some of us get more money because we have bigger family, or we have more land that we need to take care of, right? So how does the pie get split up? By your wage, by your salary, right? By your income. So it's not that everybody gets equal stuff. It's not that things are allocated, because of need or whatever, right? It's the fact that, you get what you get what supposedly you attribute or kind of add to the price of the product, right? So again, that simple model of, you're selling birdhouses or something, right? And so you get paid the difference between the cost of all the materials to make the birdhouse and then the final price of the birdhouse, right? You're the only worker that's doing it. And then how is the system going to promote progress, right? So this last one is really, our kind of key one in terms of 1, 2, and 3 are very, I guess they're all very positive in a way, right? What do I mean when I say positive economics or positive term? So it's essentially positive is talking about how we're describing the world as it is, right? So positive is saying, you know, how are they produced, who's going to get them, what's going to be produced, right? Normative, the other type of questions that we would have, right, would be, you know, how should goods and services be produced, right? Because, I mean, you know, as we know, there's a ton of food waste every year in the United States. And there's a ton, you know, and there's a ton of stuff that, you know, stays in warehouses and never gets sold. So it's not as if our current system is completely efficient. But what do we have? We have like discount stores like TJ Maxx and Marshalls and stuff, right? So the stuff that doesn't get sold in department stores goes to those places and gets sold at a discounted price and so on and so forth. And then if they don't get rid of them, then they try to give them to Goodwill. And then if Goodwill and other places like that and, you know, thrift stores kind of can't sell them, then they pack them all up and they send them to, you know, Colombia and other emerging countries, right? As essentially just like alms so that, you know, people can have spare clothes. So that's why sometimes when you go to developing and emerging countries, you'll see random like 90s t-shirts or something, you know, or like Super Bowl misprinted t-shirts or whatever, right? So, so the questions about, you know, how should we produce it, you know, how should we allocate, you know, those are all normative, right? So we're trying to kind of like establish norms rather than positive is just describing the world as it is. This last one is really kind of, I would say, more normative, right? You know, saying how is the system going to promote progress? So even in the answering of that, you're kind of like passing a value judgment over it, right? And so, you know, the capitalist system promotes progress through, you know, incentivizing, you know, creative, individualistic, you know, entrepreneurship, right? And so what do we mean when we think, you know, of entrepreneurship, right? We think of, you know, Bill Gates in his garage. We think of, you know, Jeff Bezos starting Amazon, right? We think of, you know, Crazy Man and Tesla and everything, right? You know, so, you know, these kind of like different ways of going about things, you know, we've really been one of the driving powers of that for a long time. And so people attribute that to this kind of individualistic, rugged spirit. You know what I mean? Now, what's the flip side of that? Well, everybody's, you know, a temporarily broke millionaire, right? So there's this kind of like notion that, you know, if you're not a millionaire or whatever, it's your fault, or, you know what I mean? Where really in reality, there's a lot of different circumstances and a lot of luck and a lot of support that, you know, the parents of all those people provided, right? Or the society or the school or whatever, you know, mentors that was provided in order for them to progress, right? To succeed. And so again, you know, we talked about that recent, you know, explosion in Beirut, the, you know, the Lebanese government stepping down, right? You know, and so that was essentially a system that said we can't promote progress anymore. The corruption's too widespread. It's bigger than the government. So the best thing to do is just shut the government down and just kind of start anew. And so, you know, and we're having a big discussion here in the United States, you know, over the summer, right, about, you know, the policing system, right? How does that promote progress? How do we, you know, do we restart it? Do we reform it? You know, all of this kind of stuff, right? So, so these are all really economic questions as much as they are social questions, right? A lot of them are very linked together. Okay, so picking up from there, let's take some notes real quick. So first of all, so that was the A part, right? So B, what will be produced? And so what are these key terms we're kind of looking at? We're looking for profitable things. The total revenue must be greater than the total cost, right? Pretty simple stuff. Everybody knows what I mean when I'm talking about revenue, right? So if we had a lemonade stand, we were selling lemonade for $1 a piece. All we sold was 8 lemonades that day. We got $8 of total revenue that day, right? It cost us 10 cents for each lemonade. Then that means that our total cost, right? So if we did $1 a day times the 8 cups, that would be $8 of total revenue, right? And we got to make sure that that's greater than our total cost. And our total cost is going to be 0.10 times those 8, right? But then also, and here's where we really fail to include stuff a lot, right? We have to have the implicit cost there, right? And so what is this? This is the entrepreneur's time, right? The opportunity cost of what they could have been doing for that day instead. So 8 hours, I don't know, $10 an hour, right? So let's say 80 bucks. So if you only made $8, even though the actual cost of that lemonade there, right, was, what is that, 80 cents? Does it make sense? No, not when I include the implicit cost, right? My opportunity cost. This is my also the opportunity cost of, you know, my time and energy and entrepreneurship. And so this is not the case, right? $8 is not greater than $80.80. So as a result, this would not be a profitable activity for me to set up on the side of Highway 20 and try to poach clients from Daylight Donuts with a freaking lemonade stand, right? It's not gonna work. It's not gonna be worth my time. Even if I had a lower opportunity cost of my time at $5 an hour, right? I'd have to do significantly more business. So what happens if I, you know, decided to do this anyways? I didn't do any research, and I did it anyways. And after 3 days, it's 115 degrees outside. I'm losing all this money. What am I going to do? Am I going to keep going at it? Hopefully not, right? That's the definition of insanity: going about the same thing over and over again and expecting different results, right? So, you know, the producers are able to exit the industry as easily as they're able to enter the industry, right? So we kind of have this notion of free entry and exit of the producers. And then another kind of buzzword just around this B section out, right, is when we talk about, you know, consumer sovereignty. What do we mean when we say consumer sovereignty? What if all of a sudden there was a study that said that lemons shorten your lifespan? Nothing you can do about it. And I was just like, I don't care. I'm a lemonade man. My dad was a lemonade man. I'm gonna keep making lemonade and selling it on the side of the road, right? Well, this notion of consumer sovereignty, right? This means that essentially, you know, consumers vote with their dollars, right? And what do we mean by voting with their dollars? You know, so they'll boycott places or products they don't like. And they will also frequent places just because they have similar values, or because the product is very popular for them, or whatever the case may be, right? So this notion of, you know, voting with your dollar, right? So the businesses aren't entirely free to produce what they want. They're free to enter and exit these different markets, right? But at the end of the day, they're kind of, you know, they're slave to the consumer, so to speak, right? Now, in economics, we talk a lot about, so the book doesn't really talk about this, but I just kind of want to mention it. We talk a lot about this thing, you know, which is essentially, and it's kind of a big word, but it just means that they're not separate from the system. They're not outside the system. So endogenous. So the alternative to this would be exogenous, right? So like exoskeleton is outside, you know, it's shell outside of you. And like, so this is talking about, this is inside the system preferences. So I just want you guys to be aware that, you know, yes, there's consumer sovereignty, but also if you build it, they will come. Whoa, whoa, whoa. What did I do? Lamp on? Lamp? Oh. I love lamp. I held something. Should I power it down? Oh, okay. If you build it, they will come. So many of you probably don't know that this is a Field of Dreams reference from the movie Field of Dreams. And the reason why we kind of talk about that is in the movie, you know, this guy built this baseball field in the middle of nowhere in this cornfield because he kind of was like hearing these voices, and it was, and you know what, like the Babe Ruth and all these like, you know, baseball fan, you know, like famous stars from the past ended up kind of like showing up as apparitions and playing there, and it was like a, like spoiler alert, right? And it was like a tourist attraction for him, yada yada yada. And so it's a really popular movie, and it had this phrase, if you build it, they will come, right? And essentially, you know, there's a lot of stuff that until they produce it and market it to you, you don't know that you want it. You know, like fidget spinners and, you know, silly bands, right? You guys remember silly bands back in the day? I don't know if you, yeah. So when I was in high school, was a magician. I know, surprise. You know, one of the things that we had was we had rubber bands that were like pressed to be different shapes as like a reveal for the trick. You know, you would kind of like hold the rubber band straight and you would do this whole trick, you know, and then at the end of it, you would like end up being a star, and the person would be like, oh man, you made it into a star, right? Because like nobody had really seen pressed rubber bands and that had been like pressed and shit. So then like fast forward 5 years, and like I'm in the middle of college, and like these silly band things become a crazy. I'm just like, why didn't I put this together? Just make animal shapes and just like sell them to kids. You know what I mean? Like like the technology was always there. A group of people knew about it, right? But it wasn't until somebody put it together and then just like kind of, you know, put it in the impulse item everywhere, right? For the kids to see and, you know, like just grab, right? You know, you guys will notice all the stuff that's on the bottom shelves, all impulse stuff for 2.5, 3-year-olds. So essentially, you know, advertising, right? That's why advertising is a billion-dollar industry, right? If our preferences were not endogenous, why would they spend so much money on advertising and marketing? And it's so funny because, you know, I have, you know, friends and family, and they'll be like, I don't know why they like, you know, advertise insurance. I've never once seen one of these insurance commercials and been like, oh, I'm going to change my insurance. And I'm like, no, what happens is over time, if you see enough of that Geico or that Progressive or that whatever commercial, then when you are getting a new car or renewing or shopping around, right, it's like subconsciously in the back of your head that you're associating it with extra savings or extra quality or ease or whatever the case may be, right? Whatever the particular thing that they're trying to sell you on, right? And so, yeah, so just keep in mind, though we have consumer sovereignty, endogenous preferences also are hold true, very much so. Okay, let's go to C. How will the goods and services be produced? And so we've got the market system, right? The market system is the thing that you know, encourages and rewards or punishes producers. So it kind of derives least cost production per unit, which, you know, isn't always the best thing, right? Because sometimes we end up with inferior quality things, and if that's the only selection, you know, if there's a monopoly or something, right, and it's the only thing that we have to buy, and it's not good quality, then that's a market failure, right? So we're going to talk about those specific things as well once we get a bit more comfortable modeling what's happening in these markets. So why are they doing this, right? Well, you know, firms wish to maximize profits. Firms aim to maximize their profits. And this is done in a big way by minimizing the costs. And why would that be? Let's think about that for a second. Why would maximizing profits often mean minimizing the costs of the operation?
Because of large quantities, like you're receiving large quantities, and it's cheaper to like manufacture large quantities than small quantities. Very
good. So you're actually talking about something. So it's kind of like a side note. You're talking about something called economies of scale, which absolutely is true, right? Essentially, economies of scale. And as you know, that as the more that you produce, right? So if you produce thousands of things, it's going to be cheaper per unit. So you're absolutely onto something there, but I'm actually talking about kind of something a bit more general, a bit more theoretical, right? So most of the time firms, so why is this like this? Well, most of the time firms are price takers. So what do I mean by price takers? Well, I mean, just, you know, let's unpack that compound word, right? They don't make the price. They just have to take whatever that market price is and just accept it as fact, right? So these firms are price takers. So if you have very little control over the price, you're doing all you can, you're running commercials, you got Michael Jordan sponsoring you or whatever, you know what I mean? Like to try to, you know, get people to like your product or associate your product with success or beauty or whatever, right? Like the cologne commercials and the perfume commercials are the best, right? They're just like a minute long of just like the most luxurious, amazing, like mansion house and beach time. And you're like, what is this even? And then at the end of it, it's just like Calvin Klein, blah, blah, blah. Like, oh, right, hold on. You know, like it's so, like, they're the most flagrant in terms of like just trying to be like, we're associating this with like good times in this particular aspect, right? So they're doing everything they can to influence the quantity and everything like that, right? But usually they're price takers. And so if they're price takers, then they can't charge more to increase their revenue. What they can do, if they minimize price enough, right? If they squish the price down enough, if they lower, or the cost, sorry, if they squish the cost down enough, they can kind of sweep the market, right? By setting the price a little lower than everybody else. By setting And so this is a big reason why, you know, firms are located where they are, right? So firms do various things to achieve these low costs, right? So let's see, you know, they locate near their inputs. So if you're making, you know, steel or something like that, right? Or if you're making tables from aged redwood or whatever, right? Like you would be close to a quarry, you would be close to the redwoods that are able to get chopped down, right? Like you don't want to have to do what? Pay a bunch of money to transport it across the country, right? So they're going to, you know, try to minimize transportation costs. That's why a lot of the stuff comes to us on these giant ferries that move at like 2 knots per hour or something, right? Because that's the cheapest way for the goods to get around the world. But what also ends up happening because of the fact that, like, okay, so we'll talk about that in a second. So they minimize transportation costs. They're trying to, you know, get the most out of all the resources, right? So, you know, kind of increase the productivity, enhance the productivity of the resources that they do use. And what are the resources again, right? We've got land, labor. And what do we mean by labor? We're talking not just about people, but we're also talking about the human capital, right? We're talking about how educated the workforce is, how skilled they are, you know, how good their eyesight is, how well can they follow directions they need to be micromanaged, so on and so forth. Land, labor, capital. What do I mean when I'm talking about capital? I'm talking about bridges, roads. I'm talking about airports. I'm talking about, you know, cell phone and other kind of things like that, right? I'm talking about just office space. I'm talking about ovens and desks and computers and, you know, so capital takes a lot of different forms, right? But one thing it never is, and I just kind of want to get this into your brains right now, one thing it never is just like money. Money by itself is savings, but unless it's invested, and I'm not just talking like invested like you buy some stocks on Robinhood or on E-Trade or something like that, right? Like unless it's invested, unless it's like put into capital, unless somebody uses that to expand their business somehow, or you know, buy a new whatever building, oven, lights, air conditioner system, right? Unless that happens, it doesn't become capital. It's just savings. So that tricks everybody up at first, right? Because you're just like money, savings, capital, it's all the same thing. It's not quite, okay? And then what's the last thing? There's 4. What's the last one? The government help? It's actually one of the trick questions from your quiz. No, it's not. So it's entrepreneurship. Oh, so remember, you know, so, I mean, that might be the case in, you know, we watched that video which talked about, you know, explain Singapore, right? You know, so much of their businesses are all state-owned enterprises, right? We don't have a lot of state-owned enterprises here. What do we have that are similar? We have nonprofits, non-government organizations and things like that, right? But I mean, you know, we keep them under rather strict scrutiny, and you know, there's certain laws about profit, you know, compensation of the CEOs and things like that, right? And so really here, it's not so much about, you know, government help, and it's not so much about, you know, where you fit in the system in a way that it might be in a more centrally planned economy like Singapore, like China, like those other places, right? You know, here it's all that individualistic spirit, that entrepreneurship. So we're thinking, you know, Bill Gates, you know, Elon Musk, you know, I mean, Oprah Winfrey, right? I mean, she grew up out of poverty and built this media empire, you know, after like, you know, being a news anchor, and then them telling her like, you don't look right, like, and then firing her from TV. You know what I mean? Like, so what did she do? She was an entrepreneur, and she built this whole other thing, you know, and I mean, you know, some of it hasn't done as well as expected, right? Like, or like her channel in and of itself probably wasn't the best move, but I mean, you know, she was the richest lady for a long time there, and very powerful. Had a lot of people listening. Had a lot of pull, right? Was able to recommend a lot of products, and people did what she, you know, they believed her, and she kind of she influenced their opinion, right? It was endogenous preferences, right? If you build it, they will come. If it was on Oprah, your parents were probably more likely to buy it in the 2000s. I'm just saying. All right. What are some of the other things they do? Just resource prices in general and technology, right? So they're just really trying to just minimize that kind of combination of technology and resource price, right? Because it's usually a both thing, mix. Price, right? Because like, you know, they're choosing to invest a certain amount of money right now to essentially have it be more efficient so they're using less resources, right? But what if they expect for the price of the resource to decrease over time? Then why would you spend the twice as much money on the really, nice thing that's super efficient when, you're not really going to need it as much because the resource that, used to be what's called your bottleneck, or like the thing that like is the most expensive, kind of cost. If that's all of a sudden going to be cheaper, then that's going to influence your decision about how much you're going to invest and kind of which piece of machinery you're going to buy. All right, so the most efficient technique, right? When we talk about efficiency, what are we talking about? It's the technique that gives the most, produces the most with the smallest amount of scarce resources. And so how we actually do this, the only way to measure efficiency is we have to look at it in monetary units, right? What do I mean by monetary units? Dollars. Why is that? Well, because, it's hard to compare. If we're looking at just the same production process, right? Then we're like, okay, we can take a look at the amount of, wheat and other feed and things like that per pound of cattle after auction, right? And we can compare that, and it'll be what, dollar. So one of them will be in monetary and the other one will be in, but it'll even be like dollar per pound, right? So it's kind of this weird monetary. And then the other one would be in, bales of hay or whatever, right? That would be okay if we were just comparing to other, cattle farmers of similar size, right? Or ranchers of similar size, ranchers that had similar types of land that were able to grow similar amounts of feed and things like that, right? And so what do we do instead, right? And then also we can't kind of compare efficiency cross-industry then, right? We can only really compare when we're looking at specifically this production process that has this input and it has this output, right? And also most production processes are very complicated and involve a supply chain that goes across the world and back and, into 3 different countries over there and then back here. So it's much more difficult. So we use monetary units, right? We do our best to assign a price to it, to look at the market price, essentially how much would this cost if I were to buy it, and then value it like that, right? So if it's something that we're producing in-house, we go to the market to try to find a comparative price. So competition is going to eliminate those firms that are really crappy and inefficient, and as a result, we're going to end up with that, like I said before, that what do we call the low cost, least cost production per unit, right? So that's kind of what we're driving towards with the market system. It's one of the main advantages of it, right? By using prices, by using the profit incentive. So who's going to get the output, right? Who will help me eat the bread? Me. So this is how is income distributed? Because at the end of the day, products and services go to those who have the means, right? They're willing and able to buy them, who have the means and desire to do so. And so, therefore, the ability to buy this stuff is determined by the property and human resources you provide, right? So your labor provided to the market, any property, so any investments that you have, you get a return on those investments, right? The return on investments. And these both are influenced by the prices, the market prices themselves, right? So like the market price for your labor is your wage. It's going to fluctuate over time, right? We're all going to college so that we get higher wages, right? So we increase our human capital so that we add more value to whatever enterprise we are a part of, or maybe because we want to start our own enterprise and we want to, learn, the lessons of entrepreneurs and other people that have come before us. We want to learn how to, keep track of our own books and kind of be a little less reliant on other people, right? Because, businesses are multi-headed hydra beasts, right? At the end of the day, there's no such thing as a simple small business, excuse me. And then investments, right? So your return on investment, this is, dictated by the market, right? The stock market fluctuations. Stock market, also the bond market to a limited degree. So real quick, just so that we're all on the same page. So stocks and bonds. So a stock, so these are both investments. These could be both investments in a company. So both of these can be investments in a company. A stock is essentially a piece of ownership. Just trying to keep it real simple. A bond is a loan. And then to further complicate things, which I know we love, bonds are issued also by countries, right? So, the United States issues bonds, Mexico, things like that, right? So different countries issue bonds, different states issue bonds, right? So Nebraska, Colorado, Florida, right? All of those issue bonds. There are things called municipal bonds, right? So, different counties, issue bonds, cities, and then, like state colleges, right? Other entities like that, right? So Chadron State College actually issued a bond for the Math and Science building. And so it just so happened that because of the fluctuations in the prices and what was going on in the market, that we actually got a really good price on what does that mean? What's the flip side of us getting a really good price? The investors are not getting a very good return on their investment, right? A good price for us means we don't have to pay a lot back. So bonds are considered to be safer. Stocks are considered to have higher returns, be more of a, in higher risk, higher return as a general rule of finance and economics and stuff, higher risk, higher return. If something goes bankrupt, the bonds are reimbursed first, right? The bonds are what was the word I'm looking for? Valued, or yeah. And then stocks, and then different types of stocks. So there's like type A, type B, type C. And so it's really interesting because, everybody, in the COVID thing, and right, being home all the time and the extra $600 a month, right? A lot of people started kind of trading on Robinhood and stuff, right? And because there's free trades, and I mean, eventually, so Robinhood started doing these free trades, and then now every place almost does free trades, which is pretty cool. But so you get all these people that don't really know what they're doing, and then a place like Hertz goes bankrupt because, nobody's renting cars anymore, nobody's traveling, right? And so they go bankrupt. I mean, it was also because they had really crappy business practices. It was like every time they would go to get more money, Wall Street would be like, no way. And so what they would do is then they would buy a bunch of new cars, because apparently rental car companies make more money in revenue buying and selling cars than they do in actually renting cars. They buy a lot of cars and then sell them to dealerships as used cars or whatever, because they're like gently used cars. But again, this kind of all like collapsed at the same time. And what they did, so they went to Wall Street and they're like, we need more money. And Wall Street's like, no way, like you already got so much money, you're so highly leveraged. So there's another word, leverage, right? You got so much debt compared to what you're making right now. And so what they would do is they would spin off a new company, have that new company buy a bunch of new cars, and be like, and then have that new company go to Wall Street and be like, well, we want a loan. And Wall Street be like, oh, well, you look good. You've got all these assets and no debt. And like, yeah, you're owned by Hertz or whatever, you know what I mean? But like, you're not technically Hertz. And so they kept on kind of like spinning off these like little like companies that were underneath Hertz. And then it all became this house of cards. And so their stock price just like collapsed to like less than $1, right? And a bunch of people on Robinhood ended up like buying it. And so there's this great Planet Money story, I'm pretty sure it's Planet Money, about this woman who bought it really, really cheap, spent like $2,000. Like she works for the NSA or something like that, right? She's like some government like intelligence person. She bought it really, really cheap and just watched it, and essentially she was one of the first people to buy it in the middle of this kind of like frenzy for it. And so then she waited a few weeks till it got up to like $8 or something, right? And then she sold it and made, I don't know, $10,000, something, you know what I mean? Like she says it on the interview. I'll try and find it. I'll find it and I'll post it for you guys. But here's the crazy thing is like, if she were to just buy that and hold it and wait for the bankruptcy and everything like that to go through, she would have gotten nothing. Because like the bondholders get paid first, and Hertz was so in debt and everything like that, right? And so like it was this worthless asset that she was buying that was entirely just reflecting the fact that a bunch of people had the same kind of idea and were demanding it too. And so everybody's very curious about, what's going on with the stock market and stuff. And PJ, the finance guy here, I was talking to him about it this morning. And he's like, there's no making sense of it right now. It's you know what I mean? And a lot of it is this kind of, these narratives, right? These separate narratives about things, right? Like the top value company in the world right now is Apple. Again, despite the difficulties that they've had with supporting revenue and, things like that and blah, blah, blah. Tesla is like crazy overvalued right now, like $1,400, it was like $300 2 years ago or something. But again, it's these narratives that drive these perceptions, which are really what drive the prices at the end of the day. Not so much they're supposed to be driven by market fundamentals, but not so much. So bonds, so these places don't issue stocks though. You can't buy a share of Chadron. And like if Chadron made a profit, if they collected more tax revenue. So does anybody know how Chadron makes almost all their tax revenue? Most of these small towns, through hotel fees and gas taxes. And why is that? Because nobody wants to raise taxes on anything that they have to pay. And if you live there, odds are you're not going to be staying at a hotel or motel there, right? And so that's like literally, it's just one of the easiest things to kind of get through. So a lot of their funding is tourism driven. All right, let's take a little video break. This is talking about kind of global trade, and essentially the dollar is the dominant vehicle for trade, right? So it's really difficult for a lot of us to understand this because there's this great metaphor about if you're a rolling hill and you're always like if you were born rolling down a hill and you're still rolling, how would you know that you're rolling? Like how would you ever know that the world is actually not this this, right? And so since we're born in the United States and we're born having such easy access to the dollar and stuff, we don't really realize what a gift it is and kind of how that access to this currency, which is used all over the world for saving, for international trade, how that access to it is really an advantage that we have, internationally, business-wise, but also just, in terms of, that's part of the reason why a lot of the goods that we buy that we import are so cheap, right? It's because of the fact that the dollar is used internationally as a. So this looks weird because it's out of 100, but it's all these, if you add up all these things, like even just add up the first two, right? Nearly 90% plus 30%, that's 120. What's going on there, Chris? Well, every foreign exchange transaction has two sides, right? Dollar to a yen, pound to a ruble, right? So in order to really look at this, we have to look at it out of 200%, which is, I know, like a weird way to think about it. The long arm of the US law can't hide from us. True. All true. All right. Let's do this in a second. Okay. So lastly, let's go over the notes for what the book says about how the capitalist system promotes progress. What's the story there, right? Oh, it's already on. E. How does capitalism promote progress? Well, essentially, the market system promotes what? Technological improvements. How does it do that? It does that by allowing individual property rights which, I mean, really, that's like the big crux, right? And so my kind of counter story here is what were they called? They're all over the place now, but what were they originally called? Those little moonwalker things? The like Segway ripoffs? What were they called? What's the generic name for them when they like first came out? I can't think of it now. You guys know what I'm talking about? Where you stand on it and you just lean forward? Hoverboards, that's right. My generation got so mad at that because we grew up on Back to the Future. This is not a friggin' hoverboard. So that hoverboard, right? So the Planet Money did a really cool investigation about like trying to figure out like what was the origin of this, and they like essentially there was no one origin, right? So like these factories in China, like the kind of factory bosses like get together and just like drink and just like kind of like just like put different random parts of the stuff that they're building in their factories together. And this was like one of the things they built one day was this hoverboard, right? And so then like all 3 or 4 of them or whatever that were there, like started kind of producing their own little version of them separately. You know, and it was just this mad rush to the market, right? Just trying to get them to the United States as quickly as possible and you know, charge and get that money, right? But what ended up happening? There was like a million videos of them like catching on fire and exploding and, you know, all this other kind of stuff, right? And so, you know, and this has also happened with, there's another story that's also about China. That's about some guy who's like a drone designer or something like that, drone inventor. And he's all like bummed out, you know, because he made this amazing drone and he spent all this time, you know, and like he was able to like push it out there and then, you know, sell it for maybe like 6 months, but then somebody else just figured it out and ripped it off and, you know, is selling it now, right? And so there's no real property, specifically intellectual property protection, right? And so the lack of intellectual property protection kind of really robs, you know, individuals that incentive to be creative and put all this time and effort and energy into something, right? Because I mean, you know, there's a lot of things when you're inventing stuff, you fail a lot of times, right? And so, you know, to kind of, it's all about this, you know, eventual return on all that time and investment, right? And if there's no guarantee that somebody else can't just come in and just poach your hard work, then, you know, why bother? And so that's, you know, that's also kind of one of the narratives about, you know, why the US system, the market system, specifically the Western system, promotes progress, because of the fact that the technological improvements that result from the property right protection and things like that, right, you know, have been the driving force of the world for the last, what, 70 years. I mean, you know, we can't deny that. And then, so the second part of this is that technological advancements promotes accumulation of capital goods, right? So capital good accumulation. So I know a lot of times when we talked about the PPF, I had like capital as one of the axes, right? So, but I want you guys to know that if we're just talking about, let's say, so the kind of classic example that we used to use, but it's not politically correct anymore, but I can use it, is guns and butter, right? We can either produce guns or we can produce butter. What happens if we have capital good accumulation? Well, every year we're going to be able to produce more guns and butter because essentially the more capital you have, the more efficient you are. So why is that? Well, a lot of the technological advancement is, and so this is a term you don't need to know, but it just kind of makes sense. Labor saving technical change, you know what I mean? So it's not just the fact that they're making things more efficient, it's the fact that they are making it so that there's less laborers required, or the amount of training that the laborer needs or human capital that they need decreases, right? And so as a result, given that we only have so many hours of a lifespan on this planet, right? If we increase the productivity of those labor hours for a society, we're going to be able to have more and more stuff, everything else held constant. Okay. Questions on that notion of promoting progress, right? So capitalism, the market system, it's through technological progress. Also, really, I mean, human capital accumulation has been kind of a theme in the last 20 years or so too. That's not one of the classic themes. All right, so you guys already know about the circular flow model, right? In terms of, what's the fact that we've got, here, I'm going to bring us to a more complicated one. So we already learned about it in the reading and everything like that, right? And so let's go ahead and look at this one and see what's going on here. All right, so here we have a model that actually has foreign countries, which is nice, right? Because the circular flow diagram that we normally have kind of doesn't have that, right? And so we've got different kind of, codes for this flow chart here, right? We've got a GDP, that's the national income. We've got consumption here, that's how much we are consuming, right? Spending is a household spending on goods and services. I'll put a link to this on the website and in an announcement too, if you guys want to mess around with it. Investment here, right? What is investment? This is the capital that is being created, right? So it's not just, it's the quantity of business investment has no dependency on levels of savings, right? Because bank loans create deposits. And so essentially, I just want you guys to keep this clear in your mind that savings is different than investment. You have to utilize the savings for productive means for it to become investment, right? So every year there's some consumption, there's some investment, there's some savings, right? We've got the savings over here. There's a flow of savings. So this is the, and then we have a little surplus of savings. Pre-tax income, then the government takes their taxes, right? And then it becomes after-tax income, which is where it comes into the decision to either consume, invest, spend, and then that's counted as GDP. So here, real quick, we'll just do one of the flows. So what if we increased in investment? So by increasing investment, let's make it way slower. And let me refresh it. No questions. All right, so let's go ahead and send it really slow. Send some investment, right? So the investment here, some of it is spent, it's counted as GDP. Some of it goes to foreign countries. It then comes back around in terms of paychecks to workers, taxes to the government. The workers take some of that and they save it, which becomes investments, which is combined with consumption to make that measure, that GDP measure, right? Which is what this water wheel is kind of saying, this flow. It's the national income. It's kind of what happens in 1 year. And so we can mess around with, well, what if we increase government spending? So government spending, when we do that, it starts out over here in the consumption side, right? Why is that? Well, government spending increase kind of goes directly to the people, right? Because they just end up hiring new people to build roads or whatever, and the people just spend it. So we assume that when we, all that money, the Trump dollars, right, the $1,200 everybody got, right? We assume it was spent. I'm pretty sure the studies will corroborate that. And so then it goes, again, the next period, it becomes government, the government takes their chunk, we get paid. That government spending is combined with the consumption and the investments for that period to be the GDP. And what happens if we were to increase our exports? So the increase in exports here, that's a leakage from the system, right? So it's going to a different foreign country. They're giving us, we're not getting as much imports as we're getting back. So when we send exports away, we're getting cash. And when we're importing things, we're giving them cash. So we end up getting a surplus of cash there, which ends up adding with the extra consumption and extra savings to become the GDP. So I think this does a much better job of kind of showing us the flow rather than the book's description, which is like a very simple, we can find 1.5 million versions of that. Escape. Nope, that's not gonna work. So literally, this is going to be the same everywhere, right? In terms of, we've got households and businesses, so they abstract away from the government, they abstract away from the foreign countries, right? They say households, they sell their labor and they buy crap. Businesses buy labor and they sell stuff. The product market, that's where the households buy the stuff, right? That's, Walmart or whatever. And then the factor market, that's where, laborers are hired and stuff, right? So those are the offices and things like that. So it's obviously a lot more complicated, but this is the simplistic depiction here. And this is all you're going to really be quizzed on. I really like the other one. All right, back to notes. 10 more minutes. Okay, cool. So let's start on chapter 3 in demand, and then we'll call it. Demand, supply, market, equilibrium, equilib. So when we're talking about markets, what are we talking about, right? So let's define a market. It's really anything that brings buyers and sellers together. It's the largest marketplace in the world. Come on, you know this. He's the richest man in the world. Amazon. Right? Largest market in the world, Amazon. So, you know, it could be local, national, international in scope, right? So this is obviously international. You know, local one would be something like, you know, the bean broker or whatever. You can buy candles and jewelry and all other stuff there in addition to food and beverages and coffee. And, you know, national or, you know, state ones, right? Runza, you know, it can be regional. So these marketplaces, these markets, well, actually, so Runza is probably not the best in terms of regional marketplace because it's actual. I mean, Beanbrook is good because they sell other goods inside of there as well. They sell candles, jewelry. So it's like an actual little market in there. But we don't really have a market, right? I mean, we have individual stores. You know, there used to be a market where everybody would come together. There's farmers markets, right? You get maybe some of you have been to farmers markets that happen on the weekends in cities and things. I mean, they happen out here sometimes, but not often. I don't see them. Sometimes they're impersonal and remote for the most part, right? Sometimes they're face-to-face, so not a lot of face-to-face these days. For the most part, we're going to be talking about competitive markets. And so what do I mean by competitive markets? I mean that there's a large number of independent buyers and sellers. If you guys have taken micro with me, microeconomics, then you know that, you know, that number of buyers and that number, well, actually the number of sellers really is the kind of key thing, right? That's going to influence how you behave. If there's no other sellers, if there's no other competition, you're going to do whatever the heck you want, right? If there's only one other competition, you're still probably going to do whatever the heck you want. You might just be checked a little bit because the other person's there, right? But there might be like a an unspoken agreement, right? That, like, you know, you guys are going to kind of, you know, just overprice it a little bit, not too much, not say anything or whatever. So for the most part, we're going to kind of abstract away from that and assume that everything's competitive. And when we talk about the product market, right, that's goods and services, resource factors, and production. Yeah, yeah, yeah. All right, cool. Demand. So when we talk about demand, so first of all, you know, at the core of it, demand is a curve, right? So it's a line, it's downward sloping. Demand is downward sloping. That's how we remember it. Downward sloping. We can also think about it, and then also we got to label these axes, right? So before, when we were talking about an economic model and we had axes, we had guns and butter, we had goods and services today, or capital investment, or whatever the case may be, right? So what's going on here? Well, we have price on the y-axis, the dollars, and then we have quantity on the x-axis. And if we have a hard time remembering which is which, you can just remember that we speak and read in English, which is a left to right language. The alphabet song helps us in this aspect. We can sing it to ourselves. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P comes before Q, right? So P is to the left of Q. So that way, never put quantity up there. That make sense? The mnemonic is L, M, N, O, P, Q. P comes first, then Q. I almost got a really bad grade on a test in grad school because I flipped those. It's a little dyslexic. Try to really stress that for you guys. It's so easy. But then also, like, when I first started to do that, I had like students come in office hours and they'd be like, I don't understand, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh, well, this mnemonic thing. And they're like, that's why you were singing the alphabet song in class. And I was like, oh, I guess I should be like more explicit about that. But like, there's a reason why. So I hope that was clear. Okay, so this is telling us how much people are willing to buy at any given price. So there's two interpretations. We could think about, you know, if the price of pizza is $2, we could think about this as the fact that at $2, there would be 4,000 people that'd be willing to buy that pizza at $2. What if the price went up to $3? Well, you know, it's starting to get pricey for a piece of pizza, right? You know, like, how good is it? What's it got on it? It's got mac and cheese on it. As a result, the number of pieces of pizza is going to go down to something like 2K. So this behavior, as the price goes up, the quantity decreases, is called the law of demand. As the price of anything goes up, the quantity demanded goes down. Does that make sense to everyone? I mean, I think we've all had experiences in this, right? Where, you know, we got used to buying something because it was new and it was on sale or whatever, you know, and then all of a sudden it's more expensive, or, you know, we're like, oh crap, I don't want to buy, I'm gonna get this other thing instead, right? And you substitute for some other good, or maybe you just don't buy it at all. Maybe it was something that you could live without. Maybe you didn't need it, you just wanted it. I feel like we did a lot today. Let's call it. All right, I'll see you Thursday.